The courtroom was silent, until Karen slammed her fist on the table, her face flushed with rage. "You think you can take me down? You have no idea who you're messing with." She shot me a glare so cold it could freeze blood, and in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about offense anymore. It was war. I stood there, heart pounding, knowing that if I didn't fight back now, she'd destroy everything I'd worked for. The gavel slammed down. The decision was made. But Karen? She wasn't done yet. Welcome back to Confessions of HOA. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe. It all started with a simple letter from the HOA. A small, official-looking envelope with that unmistakable seal. At first, I didn't think much of it. The HOA had always been somewhat overbearing with their suggestions about lawn care and minor changes, but nothing out of the ordinary. I opened the letter expecting maybe another notice about trimming a bush or repainting the fence. But instead, I was hit with something far worse. The letter claimed that my fence, the one I'd put up 2 years ago, was in violation of community guidelines. They didn't specify exactly how, just that it was unsightly and inappropriate. They were fining me $500 and demanding I either modify the fence or tear it down completely within 30 days. My first reaction was disbelief. I had followed all the rules when I built it, got the proper permits, and even consulted the HOA before proceeding. Yet here I was, facing an unreasonable fine for something that had been perfectly fine just a few months ago. I immediately thought this had to be a mistake. Surely, this was just some random bureaucratic error. So, I tried calling the HOA office, only to be sent straight to voicemail. I emailed them. Nothing. The silence from the board was deafening. My neighbors, on the other hand, seemed strangely quiet, almost too quiet. Some avoided eye contact when I saw them outside, and others looked like they were trying to hide something. It didn't take long for me to realize that this wasn't just an isolated issue. This wasn't about a fence. Something bigger was going on behind the scenes. I had a sinking feeling that this petty little dispute might just be the beginning of a much larger power struggle. But why was the HOA suddenly so intent on targeting me? And what could possibly be the real reason behind it? I was about to find out, but first, I needed to figure out what the HOA was really after. Karen, the HOA president, wasn't just any neighborhood leader. She was the embodiment of control, a woman who thrived on making sure everyone adhered to her personal interpretation of the rules. It wasn't just about keeping the neighborhood nice. For Karen, it was about maintaining her grip on power. She reveled in her role as president, using it to micromanage every detail of the community, from mailbox styles to tree heights. Her power wasn't just limited to making decisions at meetings. She had a way of making everyone feel watched, scrutinized, and, most importantly, small. I had heard the rumors, of course. Neighbors had whispered about her over the years. One neighbor had been forced to repaint their front door twice in a month because Karen didn't like the shade of blue they chose. Another had been fined for trimming a hedge incorrectly. People dreaded the monthly HOA meetings, knowing that Karen would find some minor infraction and seize it as an opportunity to assert her dominance. The woman had a history of pushing boundaries, and she had never been afraid to wield the HOA's authority like a sledgehammer. I'd never had to deal with her directly before, but I'd seen her in action. She had a way of staring down anyone who dared question her decisions, as if to say, "I know what's best for this neighborhood, and I'll make sure everyone follows my vision." At the last HOA meeting, I'd watched her completely shut down a homeowner who dared to ask why they were being fined for a missing light bulb in their front yard. Karen's response: a lecture on the importance of maintaining a pristine image for the community. The homeowner left in silence, clearly defeated. So, when I saw her name on the fine letter for my fence, I wasn't surprised. It was just another one of her petty little power plays. But this time, something felt different. There was a personal edge to it, something deeper than just enforcing guidelines. It didn't take long for me to realize that Karen wasn't merely targeting my fence. She had a reason for this, and it wasn't just about the property value. Why was she going so far to make an example of me? I had no idea yet, but I was about to find out. The fine for my fence wasn't just a one-time fee. It started to spiral out of control. The HOA sent me a follow-up letter, increasing the fine to $1,000 and adding a deadline of only 2 weeks to either fix the fence or take it down completely. The absurdity of it all left me seething. It was just a fence. I had complied with every regulation, gotten the necessary permits, and followed the rules to the letter. And yet, here I was, facing an escalating fine that was rapidly becoming impossible to ignore. I knew I had to act fast, so I tried to reach out to Karen directly. Maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe I could reason with her. I sent emails, called the HOA office, and even left a voicemail. No response. The silence from her was maddening. When I showed up at the next HOA meeting, I thought I'd finally get the chance to explain myself. I stood there, calm but frustrated, hoping for a reasonable conversation. Instead, Karen was sitting at the head of the table, smug and unyielding. The moment I mentioned the fence, she cut me off mid-sentence, her tone condescending. "The fence violates our community guidelines," she said, her eyes cold. "It's not negotiable. You will either fix it or tear it down." End of story. I tried to explain that the fence was well within the guidelines when it was built and that it had never been an issue before. But Karen wasn't listening. She wasn't interested in facts or reason. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. "You had plenty of time to make sure the fence was acceptable," she snapped. "I've given you more than enough leeway. You'll comply, or there will be further consequences." It was clear now, this wasn't just about a fence. It was about Karen asserting her authority, and she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. I could feel the walls closing in. My attempts at reason were pointless, and the frustration was starting to build. I felt cornered, trapped in a game where Karen made all the rules, and there was no way out. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. What Karen didn't know was that I wasn't about to let this petty overreach slide. And before this was over, she was going to regret messing with me. But would I be able to turn the tables before things got worse? The next HOA meeting felt like stepping into a battlefield. My heart raced as I walked into the sterile, dimly lit room, filled with rows of chairs, and sat at the back, awaiting my turn. The tension in the air was thick. I could already see Karen sitting at the front, smug and poised, as if this was just another day where she would control the entire room. Around her, the rest of the board members sat like silent sheep, too intimidated or complacent to speak up. The power dynamics were clear. Karen ruled the HOA with an iron fist, and everyone else was just too afraid to challenge her. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, trying to keep my cool. "I've tried to resolve this issue with you privately, but here we are. I want to explain that the fence has been in place for 2 years without any problems, and I've followed all the rules. The fine is unreasonable, and I don't believe it's justified." I barely got the words out before Karen interrupted, her voice sharp and dismissive. "The fence doesn't meet our standards," she said, her gaze cold. "And as president of this HOA, I have the right to enforce those standards. We've given you ample time to fix this, and you've ignored our warnings. We will not allow this violation to continue." Her smug smile only added to the frustration building inside me. This wasn't about the fence anymore. This was about her showing me who was in charge. I tried to stay calm, but her condescending tone was starting to push me to my limits. "I've complied with the rules, Karen. There's no violation here. I've even spoken to the city about it. This is a personal vendetta." At that, Karen's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, her voice dripping with malice. "You can keep arguing all you want, but if you don't tear that fence down by the end of the week, I'll have no choice but to take further action. And trust me, I can make things much worse for you. We'll take this to the next level. If you don't comply, you'll be evicted." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Evicted? Over a fence? This wasn't just petty anymore. This was personal. My head was spinning, but Karen was already moving on, as if the matter was settled. The rest of the board members sat in silence, not a single one brave enough to speak up or challenge her. I couldn't believe it. She wasn't just after the fence, she was trying to destroy my entire life. The HOA had no power to evict me, but Karen clearly thought she could get away with anything. What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. But could I take on Karen and the entire HOA board before she got any further with her threats? After the HOA meeting, I was shaken. Eviction? For offense? Karen's threat felt more like a personal vendetta than a legal action, but I didn't know the rules well enough to challenge her. I needed advice, something concrete, something that could back me up when the next confrontation came. I found a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and HOA regulations. I'll never forget sitting in that small office, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The lawyer, an older man with a calm demeanor, listened carefully to everything I explained. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "Karen is overstepping her authority here. The HOA can't just make arbitrary rules or fine people without a clear, legal basis. And certainly not for something as trivial as a fence, especially when you've followed all the rules." His words were like a light bulb going off in my head. I'd spent days trying to figure out why this was happening, why she was escalating it to this level. But now it was clear. Karen had been using the HOA as a tool for her own agenda, and I wasn't the first person she'd pushed around. The lawyer explained a few critical points. First, that HOA rules had to be explicitly stated and uniformly enforced, not based on personal preference or whim. Secondly, he mentioned a legal loophole I hadn't even considered. If the HOA was found to be acting in bad faith, like targeting me for personal reasons, their fines could be overturned, and I could even seek damages. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but a new, more pressing thought began to take its place. Karen had no idea what she was about to face. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. If I played my cards right, I could turn the tables and expose her for what she really was, an overbearing tyrant who was abusing her power. But as I left the lawyer's office, a sense of unease crept in. This battle wasn't going to be over anytime soon. What if Karen doubled down? What if she used her position to retaliate in ways I wasn't prepared for? I was ready to take her on, but I had no idea just how far she'd go to hold on to control. Would I be able to stop her before she destroyed me? It wasn't long after I'd consulted the lawyer that a neighbor, Susan, stopped me one afternoon as I was walking to my car. Susan lived 2 doors down, and while we'd exchanged pleasantries in passing, we hadn't really spoken much. But that day, she was different. Her voice was low, urgent, as if she was about to reveal something she couldn't keep to herself any longer. "I know what Karen's up to," she said, glancing around nervously to make sure no one was eavesdropping. "And you need to know too." I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Susan hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting back to Karen's house across the street, where the blinds were drawn but still suspiciously visible. "Karen's not doing this just because of your fence. There's something bigger going on." I stepped closer, trying to hear every word. Susan lowered her voice even more. "She's been using her position to push certain property values up in the neighborhood. I overheard her talking to someone from a real estate firm. She's been trying to get people to move out, offering them deals, and encouraging some to sell their properties. You know, to create a better neighborhood. But really, it's just to increase the value of the homes she's been buying up." My stomach twisted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're saying Karen's been intentionally targeting people to get them to sell, just so she can buy up their properties?" Susan nodded. "Exactly. And your fence? Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. She's probably hoping you'll get frustrated and sell. She knows you're a long-term resident, and if she pushes you hard enough, you might just move." A wave of anger and disbelief washed over me. Karen wasn't just abusing her power for petty reasons. She was manipulating the entire neighborhood for her personal gain, using her position as HOA president to control the market. This wasn't about a fence, it was about money. It was a twisted game of greed and power. But how far was she willing to go to make this happen? And would the other neighbors figure out what was really going on before it was too late? I had to find out before Karen completely turned the neighborhood into her own personal playground. As the court date drew closer, I felt a mixture of dread and determination building inside me. Every day felt like an eternity as I worked with my lawyer to prepare. We went through every document, every email, and every HOA meeting record I could find. Each piece of evidence brought us closer to taking Karen down. But as we sorted through the legal jargon, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was planning something. She wasn't going to roll over easily. I spent hours at my lawyer's office, painstakingly reviewing the details of the case. Karen's actions, her overreach, and her personal vendetta against me were all becoming clearer. We had strong evidence showing that she had violated HOA rules multiple times by imposing fines arbitrarily and selectively. But what really made me feel confident was the discovery of the hidden agenda Susan had uncovered. Karen wasn't just targeting me. She was using the HOA's power to manipulate the entire neighborhood for her own financial gain. I reached out to neighbors who had been victimized by Karen in the past, asking if they'd be willing to testify. Some were hesitant, too scared of Karen's influence to speak up. But others, frustrated by her antics for years, agreed to stand with me. They shared their stories of how Karen had driven them to the brink, using the HOA to bully them into submission. The more I heard, the more certain I became. Karen's reign was built on fear, but it was about to come crashing down. The anticipation was unbearable. My lawyer reassured me that we had a solid case, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was already plotting her next move. I couldn't help but wonder if she had something up her sleeve, some way to derail our efforts at the last minute. With each passing day, the pressure mounted, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The court date was coming fast. I could only hope that Karen's arrogance and underestimation of me would be her downfall. But what would she do when she realized we were ready for a fight? Would she cave, or would she try to fight dirty and make this even more personal? The clock was ticking, and I had no idea just how far Karen was willing to go to keep her grip on power. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The air was thick with tension, and every word spoken by the judge, every move made by Karen, felt like it could determine the outcome of this entire ordeal. Karen sat across from me, her arms crossed and a smug smile on her face, as if she thought she was invincible. The arrogance in her eyes was unbearable. She hadn't once acknowledged the evidence or the growing list of neighbors willing to testify against her. To her, this was just another opportunity to flex her power, and she was certain she'd come out on top. As the proceedings began, my lawyer and I presented our case with precision. We laid out every detail of Karen's overreach, her abuse of power as HOA president, and how she'd manipulated the rules to suit her own agenda. The evidence was irrefutable: emails, meeting minutes, witness testimony from neighbors who'd been terrorized by her. The more we spoke, the more I could see Karen's composure slipping, but she refused to back down. Every time we presented a piece of evidence, she shot it down with a sarcastic remark or an exaggerated sigh. "You've got nothing," she muttered under her breath, her eyes never leaving me. "This is just a game to you, isn't it? You think this will work?" Her smugness only fueled my determination. I was done letting her control the narrative. Every argument she made only served to expose her arrogance. Her refusal to acknowledge the truth was starting to alienate even the judge. The tension was palpable, and it seemed as though the entire room was waiting for the inevitable collapse of her defense. But as the judge turned to make his ruling, Karen's cocky demeanor remained. She leaned back in her chair, convinced she was still in control, but I could feel the shift. The judge cleared his throat and, to everyone's surprise, delivered a ruling in my favor. Karen's smug smile faltered as her face went pale, her grip on the table tightening. What came next was more than just a legal victory. Would Karen finally face the consequences of her actions, or was this just the beginning of a deeper, more personal battle? The gavel came down with a sharp, final crack, and for a moment, the room was silent. The judge's ruling was clear. I had won. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a personal one, a triumph over the woman who had tried to control every aspect of the neighborhood for years. My heart raced as I looked over at Karen. Her face turned white as the words settled in, and for a brief second, I saw the cracks in her facade. The smugness that had defined her for so long was gone, replaced with pure disbelief. But Karen wasn't about to let go of her power that easily. As the judge prepared to wrap up, she stood abruptly, slamming her hand on the table. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice rising. "You don't know what you're messing with." She marched toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the courtroom floor. It was clear she wasn't going to accept defeat gracefully. As she reached the door, one of the courtroom security officers stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Karen's eyes widened in fury, but the officer remained calm, his hand resting on the holster at his side. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the courtroom," the officer said, his tone firm but polite. "You can't do this." Karen snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "I'm the president of the HOA. I don't take orders from anyone." The officer didn't flinch. "This is a legal matter, ma'am. You need to leave now." As the tension grew, Karen finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. The power she had wielded over this neighborhood for so long was slipping away, and in the most public way possible. Her body stiffened with humiliation, her face red with fury as the officers escorted her out of the courtroom. The room watched in silence as the once powerful Karen, who had held so many people in fear, was escorted out, her defiance crumbling in the face of justice. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing her reduced to this. She had tried to tear me down, but now she was the one being led away in defeat. I watched as she disappeared down the hall, still shouting about injustice under her breath, but the feeling of victory was overwhelming. I knew this moment would change everything for the neighborhood, but as Karen was led away, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the last we'd see of her, or was she planning her next move? The days following the court ruling felt surreal. The weight that had been hanging over my shoulders for months finally lifted, but what happened next was even more rewarding than I could have imagined. Word quickly spread throughout the neighborhood, and Karen's hold over the community began to crumble. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak up against Karen now found their voices. In hushed conversations on the streets, at the mailbox, and even in front of their houses, they began to share their own stories of how Karen had terrorized them over trivial matters. No longer was she the untouchable HOA president. They saw her for what she truly was, a bully with too much power. Within a week, a new HOA meeting was called. Karen, of course, didn't show up. Her absence was glaring, and when the board members convened, it was clear that the old guard was done. The meeting room was filled with a sense of optimism and freedom that had been missing for years. The community, once divided by fear and intimidation, was now united in their desire for a fair, transparent HOA. A new board was formed, one that actually cared about the neighborhood and not about power or control. They vowed to never let something like Karen's reign happen again. It was a fresh start for everyone. As for Karen, she disappeared. Her name was never brought up again, and no one really knew where she went. Some said she moved, others thought she simply gave up. But it didn't matter. Her reign of terror was over, and with it, the fear she had instilled in the community. Justice was served. The HOA was free from the grip of a tyrant, and the community could finally breathe easy. It was a hard-fought battle, but the lesson was clear. When the community stands together, even the most powerful bullies can be brought down. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more crazy HOA tales, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Confessions of HOA. You won't want to miss the next wild story.